Hey you guys, I have had a crazy Friday. Happy Fantabulioso Friday. It's just been busy and I have a conflict tonight at 8, so I am just reading live to you now. Not live, I'm reading now and I'm going to post the video at 8 p.m. So I'm sorry that I can't read live this evening. I've kind of enjoyed that tradition of us actually being together in real time. But I am going to be posting this video so you can listen to our book. And I'm going to do everything else as normal. But I hope you guys have had a great Friday. I hope the rest of the week has gone well for you. And Winnie, I've been working in the yard. She's looking sunscreen. Stinker. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started and read our book. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we are back in Falling Up by Shel Silverstein, and this is being read with permission from HarperCollins Publishing. Her chair has a computer and I'm just not sure what to do. My computer also wasn't working, so technical difficulties all around today. Furniture bash. The hand of the clock pinched the foot of the bed. So the foot of the bed kicked the seat of the chair. So the seat of the chair sat on the head of the table. So the head of the table bit the leg of the desk. So the leg of the desk bumped the arm of the couch. So the arm of the couch slapped the face of the clock. And they pitched and they punched and they banged and they knocked. And they ripped and they flipped and they rolled and they rocked. And the poor dresser drawer got a couple of socks. There was sawdust and springs when I turned on the light after that horrible furniture fight. And that's the truth. No lie. No joke. That's how your furniture all got broke. Let me just tell y'all, that would not have flown in Bev's house. Or Grandma Mary Jane's. We call it the Grandma Mary Jane School of Clean. You did not break furniture. You did not hang upside down on the couch. Any guesses as to how I know that rule? All right. We're back in Peak by Roland Smith, and this is being read with permission from Harcourt Inc. If you recall last night, they had just met with Zopa, who was the climbing expert that Peak's dad had been with when Peak was born. And this guy really likes Peak. He's always checking in to see how he's doing. And he is going to be the Sherpa who takes Peak to the base camp of what mountain are we climbing again? Everest. So, mysterious ways, as it turned out, because when we got back to the hotel, Zopa was already waiting for us in the lobby. I didn't recognize him at first because the orange robe had been replaced by regular street clothes and an expensive-looking pair of sunglasses. The sunglasses made him look like some kind of celebrity, which I suppose he was to the trekkers and climbers gathered around him. It had taken us 10 minutes tops to catch a taxi outside of the temple. We drove straight to the hotel, and traffic wasn't any worse than it had been on the motorcycle on the way to the temple. And yet, there was Zopa, chatting with the hotel staff and guests as if he had been there all afternoon. I looked at Sunjo, expecting him to be as shocked as I was. He wasn't. Zopa does things like that, he said. How? Another shrug, which I learned later was everyone's answer to questions about Zopa. You'll get used to it, Sunjo added, then went over and greeted the vacationing monk. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't ask Zopa myself. Believe me, I was tempted. But I didn't think he would tell me. Or worse, he might give me some reasonable explanation. It's sort of like asking a magician to tell you how he does a trick, or asking a tagger how he got those 17 freight cars painted in a single night. It's all about the mystery. Sometimes it's better not to ask. Up in the room, Zopa started sorting through the gear, putting it in different piles while Sunjo and I watched. Once in a while, he would stop and have me try something on, saying, fits or doesn't fit. When he was finished, there were 3 piles. He pointed to one of the piles. We will take this and trade for things that fit. My boots, blue snowsuit, and several other items of clothing were in a separate pile with some other stuff. I pointed out that none of the things in that pile fit either. I have another use for it, Zopa said. I didn't know what that could be, but I I didn't pursue it. Instead, I pointed to the trade pile, which had several $100s worth of pitons, cams, ropes, and other expensive equipment. This gear is brand new, I said. You won't need it to go up Sagarmatha. This is what the Nepalese call Everest. My dad bought it, I argued. He might need it. Your father told me to make sure that you have everything you need to climb the mountain. How much money do you have? I told him, but I didn't mention the credit card Mom had given me. I didn't think she'd be happy about a huge bill for Everest gear. It's not enough to get the things you will need, Zopa said. Hopefully, we will be able to trade all this. He started to gather up the gear from the trade pile. Best not to argue, Sanjo whispered, and he and I helped haul the gear downstairs where a Toyota truck and driver were waiting for us. It took hours to get the replacement gear. In the process, I got quite a tour of Kathmandu. It seemed that most of the places Zopa liked to shop were located down dark, scary alleys. He was warmly greeted wherever we went until the bartering started, when he and the proprietor would end up in a shouting match until a bargain was struck. The most difficult things to find were my boots. I'd try on a pair I liked, tell Zopa they fit great, then he would make me walk and shake his head. Not right, he'd say. What do you mean? I'd insist. They fit great. Too small, he'd say. But when your toes fall off inside from the swelling and pinching, they will fit perfectly. We finally agreed on a pair that did fit great, but they were pretty battered up on the outside. In fact, all the stuff we bought was banged up. I hope this gear wasn't taken from dead climbers, I said offhandedly. Zopa looked horrified. Bad luck to use gear of the dead. No, this is from people who come to Kathmandu to climb and decide it is better to stay in bar and drink. I must have looked horrified myself. Don't think ill of them, he said. They lived. Zopa also bought a few things for himself and Sanjo, who I guess was coming with us to base camp by the gear he was getting. Unlike me, he listened carefully to Zopa's opinions and bowed every time the monk gave him something. It was late when we got back to the hotel. We went up to the room, packed everything, then loaded it into the truck. We leave for Tibet tomorrow morning at 6, Zopa said, and he and Sanjo got into the truck and drove away. Tibet. The next morning, Sanjo, Zopa, the driver, and 2 Sherpas were sitting in the tailgate drinking tea. By the look of their disheveled hair and rumpled clothes, they must have slept in the truck. Sanjo confirmed that they had, but only for 2 hours, he said. We were out getting supplies up until then. He wasn't kidding. There was so much stuff piled in the bed, I didn't know where we were going to sit. We squeezed ourselves between the gear along with 2 Sherpas, brothers named Yogi and Yash, and left the blue haze of Kathmandu behind us. We took our time, stopping at Buddhist temples and monasteries along the way, where Zopa picked up boxes of food and supplies. We already had plenty of food, and some of the food he was given wasn't going to last very long up on the mountain. I asked about it, but got the standard shrug reply. Away from the city, Nepal was everything I had imagined it to be. Beautiful valleys, rustic villages, fields tilled by oxen-pulled plows, all against the backdrop of the massive, sparkling Himalayas. I had been up on Mount McKinley and Mount Rainier, but they would be dwarfed by these snow-covered peaks. We stopped for the night outside a tiny village. Sanjo and I started to help set up camp, but Zopa waved us off. You 2 go climb. He pointed to a wall about a quarter mile away. Don't fall and come back before dark. He didn't have to tell us twice. We jogged over to the wall. It wasn't a difficult climb, but about halfway up I had to stop to rest and catch my breath. Sanjo, who had picked a more difficult route, scrambled up the rock like a lizard, smiling as he climbed past, which taught me a couple of things about him. He had much better lung capacity than me, and he was competitive. Climbers will tell you that the thing they love about climbing is that it's just them against the rock. Blah, 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 blah. That may be true if they are alone on the rock, but put another climber next to them and the race is on. I was shocked when he blew by me so effortlessly. I was the kid who was going to climb Everest, and Sanjo was just along for the ride up to base camp. Then I reminded myself that 10 days ago I was clinging to a skyscraper a few hundred feet above sea level. Not exactly the best training for scaling the highest peak in the world. If I was going to summit, I was going to have to do better than watch Sanjo's butt disappear over the top as I hung below him, gasping for breath. "I think you picked the more difficult way," he said when I finally sat down next to him on the rim. We both knew this wasn't true, but I appreciated his saying it. We sat on the edge for a while, taking in the view. It was too late to climb down before dark, so we decided to rappel to the bottom. Sanjo offered to let me go first, but I shook my head. First up, first down. When we got back to camp, dinner was ready. Zopa didn't say anything about the climb, but there was a spotting scope set up on a tripod pointed at the wall. He must have watched the whole thing. The next morning, Zopa told us the truck was overloaded and that Sanjo and I would have to walk with our heavy packs. "Why did Zopa do that?" Sanjo complained as we watched the truck drive up the road. "The truck is fine. We haven't picked up more than 50 kilos of supplies." I shrugged, but I thought I knew the answer. Zopa thought that a hike with a full pack would do me good and didn't want me to walk alone. Sorry, Sanjo. The walk was hard, but it was better than bouncing around in the back of a truck, and it gave Sanjo and me a chance to get to know each other better. Sanjo's father didn't want him to become a Sherpa. "The reason I climb," he had told him, "is so you won't have to." "Does your mother know you're on your way to base camp?" "No, and she would be very upset if she knew." Later that day, I spilled my guts about climbing the skyscraper, which I immediately regretted. When Sanjo figured out that I was telling the truth, he stopped in the middle of the road and laughed for at least 5 minutes. It didn't seem that outrageous to me, but I guess to someone who lives in the shadow of the highest mountain in the world, climbing a skyscraper is pretty lame. "Does your mother know you are on the way up to Sagarmatha?" he asked. "I don't think so. And she would murder me and my father if she knew." We finally caught up to the truck that evening. Zopa suggested we take another climb before we ate, but Sanjo and I revolted and told him to forget it. The next day, he made us walk again. He gave us a break on the 4th day because he wanted us all to cross into Tibet together. We reached the Friendship Bridge about noon. I suppose if you're crossing south from Tibet into Nepal, the name fits, but if you're going north from Nepal into Tibet, there's nothing friendly about it. The Chinese border soldiers were surly, suspicious, and rude. They examined our papers for nearly an hour and peppered us with questions I didn't understand. Zopa handled the answers calmly, but the rest of us were nervous, especially Sanjo, who had started to sweat even though it was only 35 degrees. "What's the matter with you?" I whispered. "Nothing," he whispered back. "Chinese." The soldiers nearly dismantled the truck looking for contraband. They didn't find any, but they did manage to steal some of our stuff in the process. Food mostly, but no one called them on it. The day before, as we had walked, Sanjo had given me a short history lesson about Tibet and China. It wasn't pretty. The People's Republic of China invaded Tibet 50 years ago. Since that time, over 6,000 Buddhist monasteries and shrines have been destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of Tibetans have been killed or jailed. What brings me to that boulder in the middle of the road, the prisoners were cracking into gravel. We passed by it an hour after we got over the Friendship Bridge, which sort of sums up what's happening to the Tibetans. Or, as Zopa put it later that night, our brothers in Tibet have been made slaves in their own country. We stopped at every monastery that hadn't been burned to the ground or dismantled by the Chinese, some of them well out of our way. The monks were grateful for the food, supplies, and gossip Zopa and the Sherpas brought. It was clear that this was one of the half-dozen reasons Zopa had for taking me to base camp. Sanjo and I hiked every day and climbed every evening. By the time we arrived at base camp 10 days later, I was feeling strong. So was Sanjo. Peak experience. We arrived at base camp just in time to see Josh get into a fist fight with someone. At 18,044 feet, though, it wasn't much of a fight. An older, red-faced man took a swing, which Josh easily ducked and countered by pushing him in the chest. The man landed on his butt in the snow. After this, it was pretty much over, except for the shouting. "I want a full refund," the man shouted. "If you think I'm going to sit around base camp while you and the others climb to glory, you have another thing coming." He was obviously one of Josh's clients, and not a very happy one. It's hard to get up when you are out of breath, swaddled in down clothes, with crampons strapped to your boots. Josh offered his hand to help him up, but the man slapped it away. "George, you're in no shape to go any farther up the mountain," Josh said. "You heard what Dr. Krieger said. You have a bad heart, which you should have told me about before you signed up." "My heart's fine. That witch doctor of yours doesn't know what she's talking about." A pretty woman stepped up next to Josh. "You have a heart murmur, George," she said with a slight German accent. "Blocked arteries would be my guess. You need to get it looked at as soon as you get off the mountain." "Well, I'm getting off this stupid mountain today," George wheezed, getting to his feet. "And my first appointment is not going to be with my doctor. It's going to be with my attorney. I'll sue you for everything you have, Josh." "If you want to sue me for saving your life," Josh said, "go ahead." He turned and started to walk away, then noticed us and stopped. "Looks like you have an extra climbing permit," Zopa said. "Two, actually. We had a woman leave 2 days ago, hacking up her larynx. Apparently, I'm responsible because she's threatening to sue me too." Josh looked at me. The beard he had cut off for my arraignment was growing back in nicely. "So, how was it?" he asked. "It was good." He looked back at Zopa. "Can he make it up the mountain?" Zopa shrugged. Josh glanced over at the truck where Sanjo, Yogi, and Yash were standing. "Do you have room to take George back down?" Zopa nodded. "Those three are staying. That is, if you have work." "We'll see," Josh said without much enthusiasm. "We might need some base camp help, but with 2 less climbers, we don't need any more climbing Sherpas." He looked back at the small truck, then looked back at Zopa. "It'll be a tight fit. You'll have to haul George's wife down too, and all their gear. She's in her tent, sick as a dog. You'll need to get them both to the hospital as soon as you get to Kathmandu." "There will be enough room," Zopa said. "I'm staying here too, at least for a few days. I'll talk to the driver. He'll get them to Kathmandu safely." Zopa started toward the truck, but didn't get very far. A jeep came roaring up and skidded to a stop, blocking his path. Josh swore, then said under his breath, "Captain Sheck, be cool. Let me do the talking." A tall Chinese officer in a crisp green uniform got out of the jeep and walked up to us frowning. "Papers!" "Good afternoon," Josh said with a smile. "No one go until I see papers." "Of course," Josh said. But the captain was too late. Sanjo, Yogi, and Yash were already gone. Poof. "Show him your visa and passport," Josh said. I dug them out of my pack and handed them over. Captain Sheck carefully scrutinized them, glancing between me and the photo. "You climb?" "He's my son," Josh answered. "He's on my climbing permit." "Last name no match." "He has his mother's name. We're divorced." I guess it was too complicated to explain that they were never married. The captain handed back my passport. Next, he checked Zopa's papers, then the driver's. After he finished, he locked his dark eyes on each of us and said, "We watching all you." He climbed back into the jeep and drove away. "He's not kidding about that," Josh said. "Captain Sheck and his men are always watching." He pointed to a small rise with a ramshackle building on top of it. They have a spotting scope set up there, and the rumor is that he has night vision equipment as well. They monitor the radio transmissions looking for violations. Sheck's already booted 2 climbing parties this year. Try to stay clear of him. "And he doesn't always show up dressed in uniform," Dr. Krieger warned. "He sometimes dresses like a climber and wanders around camp, catching people unaware. I'll be in the aid tent." She walked away. "What do you think of base camp so far?" Josh asked. Because of the argument and Captain Sheck, I hadn't paid much attention to the camp, but I saw now that it was gigantic. Red, blue, and green and yellow tents were scattered around for what seemed like a mile. "How many people are here?" 350 or so, Josh answered. Maybe another 50 acclimatizing farther up the mountain. Most of them must have been in their tents trying to stay warm because there weren't too many people wandering around. I looked at the temperature on my watch, 14 degrees. According to the wind gauge, the watch Josh gave me did everything. The wind was blowing 10 miles an hour, which brought the temperature down to 3 degrees above zero. Josh looked me over. You breathing okay? Any problems on the way up? Both were good questions, considering this was only the second time I'd been this high on a mountain. The summer before, I had almost made it to the top of Mount McKinley in Alaska. We were at 18,000 feet, 2,000 feet short of the summit, when our guide turned us back because of weather. Had a headache the past 2 days, I said, but it's going away. Josh pointed at George, who had returned to his tent and was angrily packing his gear. My headache's going away too, he said. At least one of them. He looked over at the truck. Sunjo and the brothers had reappeared and were helping Zopa unload it. Who's the kid? His name's Sunjo. Is he with Zopa? Yeah. Interesting, he said. Did Zopa tell you he was going to stay at base camp for a few days? I shook my head. Like you said, Zopa doesn't talk much. Yeah. Well, he's up to something. Like what? Josh smiled. He'll let us know when he's ready. Let's head over to Peak Experience headquarters. I'll introduce you to the base camp crew. Peak Experience? I didn't name it after you exactly, Josh admitted. But I probably should have. What are you talking about? Peak Experience is my adventure travel company. We started it last year. Almost wish I hadn't now. I followed him to a giant orange tent with Peak Experience tagged on the sides. The A in Peak looked like a mountain. He pulled back the flap and waved me through. Inside were several people and more electronic equipment than I had ever seen in a tent at 18,000 feet, or any tent for that matter. Laptops, satellite phones, two-way radios, fax machines, television monitors, and other gizmos. The crew was so busy talking on phones, listening to radios, tapping on keyboards, they didn't seem to notice us. None of them looked like climbers. What is all this? I asked. This is what happens when you get old and start worrying about your future. He pointed to a pudgy guy talking on a satellite phone. That guy over there is my business partner, Thaddeus Bowen. The rest of the people are support staff. There is another bunch of them in the back office in Chiang Mai, and some up on K2 and Annapurna. You're running 3 expeditions at the same time? He smiled. Get this. Most of our clients are rank amateurs. Some haven't been higher than 12,000 feet. Stupid, huh? But I'm not alone. There are at least 10 commercial operations like this at base camp. Some of them are running for 4 separate expeditions. Things have changed since your mom and I were living out of the back of that rusty old van at El Cap. When he said that he had clients, I assumed he meant experienced climbers. Nothing like this. People, Josh said. This is my son, Peak. I felt a flush of pride. Some of them nodded, some smiled, though none of them fully stopped what they were doing. Thaddeus walked over, covering the mouthpiece of his satellite phone. How'd George take the news? He took a punch at me, Josh said. Says he's gonna sue. Thaddeus rolled his eyes. Great. I'll call our attorney and tell him to get ready. He walked away, resuming his phone conversation. A woman came over and handed Josh a sheet of paper. The film crew should be here later this afternoon, and I finally tracked down the whereabouts of Holly Anglo. The name sounded familiar to me, but I couldn't remember where I'd heard it. Where is she? Josh asked. She's with the film crew, the woman answered. Apparently, she came in on the same flight. The film crew is threatening to murder her. She brought along her own personal chef and massage therapist and so much gear they had to rent a second truck. I told her she couldn't bring anybody, Josh said, and to travel light. She didn't listen, the woman said. She's also found out that you have an opening on your climbing permit. She wants to go to the top. Josh swore. How'd she find out about that? Word travels fast at high altitudes. She's here to cover Peak. not herself. What do you mean? I asked. I'll tell you about it later, Josh said distractedly. Can you reach her on the sat phone? If she's not in the middle of a massage, the woman answered, then started punching in numbers. Josh turned to me. I need to take care of this. There's a spot for your tent next to mine, the blue one out back. Why don't you go out and get set up? Sunjo helped me haul my gear and set up the tent. When we finished, we took a little tour. Now, you might be thinking that base camp on Everest would be one of the most pristine places on Earth. The truth is that you have to watch where you step. And here's a tip. Avoid digging up yellow snow to melt for your drinking water. At 10 degrees below zero, no one strays far from his tent to take care of business. Everest Base Camp is a frozen outhouse garbage dump with decades of crap. Discarded food containers and busted gear. I had read that some of the climbers and Sherpas were trying to clean it up, but by the looks of the camp, they hadn't made much of a dent. Sardine cans, chip bags, cartons, toilet paper, and other trash blew around the tents like tumbleweed. Climbers from all over the world were here. Japan, Bolivia, Mexico, Italy, Canada, Luxembourg. There were women's teams, military teams. There was even a team made up exclusively of people over 50. They had a placard outside their camp that read, "The Geriatric Team, beware of grumpy old climbers." You could pick out the commercial climbing operations by the size of their tents and their camp spots, which were usually the best on the slope. I counted 11 of them, and that's when it began to dawn on me that Josh might be just as cagey as old Zopa. There was a lot of competition sitting on the mountain under those large tents. Getting a dozen clients to the summit could bring in as much as $1 million, and if you were simultaneously mounting other expeditions on other 8,000-meter peaks, several $1 million. If an Everest wannabe was going to plop down $100 grand or several thousand to get one of the lower camps, who were they going to give their money to? The company with the best success rate? The company with the best safety record? Or maybe the company who put the youngest person in the world on the world's tallest mountain, who also just happened to have the same first name as the company that put him on the top. And did you hear about him climbing those skyscrapers in New York? Don't worry about the money. I'll get my portion back. The film crew should be here later this afternoon. She's here to cover Peak, not herself. I suddenly remembered where I had seen the name Holly Anglo. It was a byline under an article about me climbing the skyscraper. She was the reporter who broke the news about who my real father was. Did she dig up his information on her own, or did Josh give her a call and spill his guts? The youngest person so far to reach the top of Everest was a 15-year-old Nepalese girl named Ming Kippa Sherpa. If I were 1 year older, I might still be in. I stopped in mid-step. What's the matter? Sunjo asked. Nothing, I said. Would Josh have bailed me out if I had already turned 15? I didn't think so. Was he using me? Probably. Did I mind? I wasn't sure at this point. He was paying more attention to me than he had my whole life. I'm going to head back, I said. I should go too, Sunjo said. Zopa wants me to talk to the cook about helping in the mess tent. A job? I asked. For room and board, Sunjo smiled. Or tent and food, I should say. Perhaps it will lead to something else. Tent and food was not going to get the tuition paid. I could talk to my father, I offered. If I asked him, I think he'd hire you for more than tent and food. Sunjo shook his head. We had better leave that up to Zopa. He brought me to the mountain. It is for him to decide. Rock weasels. Rather than confront Josh, I crawled up into my tent, wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, and fell asleep. I know what you're thinking. Chicken! Maybe you're right. But what was I going to say? I will not be used, Father. Or how about this? Send me back to New York so I can do my time. Take that, Dad. Besides, I needed some sleep before I talked to him. Walking around at 18,000 feet wears you down. And it turned out that I didn't have time to find him because he found me. You awake? He asked. Yeah, I said, although I hadn't been until he stuck his head into my tent. He crawled in and zipped the flap closed. Did you get a chance to look around the camp? A little. There's a lot of competition for your company up here. You noticed, huh? Next year, there won't be so many commercial operations. There's only a finite number of people who have the money, time, and desire to get up this mountain. This will be the last year for a lot of operations. Including peak experience, I asked. He grinned. Your mom told me that you're smart, he said. I guess she got that from her. Flattery has never worked on me. So how much trouble are you in? Like the judge said, I look good on paper, but the truth is I'm in debt up to my crevasse. Humor, on the other hand, always worked on me. I laughed. If we have a good season this year, he continued, we might be able to recoup some of our losses next year. It's all riding on how many people we get to the summit in the next few weeks and how much publicity we get. Which is why I'm here, I added. He gave me a sheepish look. Not entirely, he said, but yeah, it's one of the reasons. That's the main reason, I thought. Might as well get it over with. If I had been 15, would you have come to New York? He hesitated, then said, probably not. I was right in the middle of leading a group of amateur climbers to Everest. I would have liked it a lot better if he had come to New York to save me because I was in trouble, not because he was in trouble. The youngest Americans to top Everest are a couple of 20-year-olds, he explained. So, your being 15 might have worked, but truthfully, getting a 14-year-old up there has a lot more sex appeal, especially after your climb in New York. There are a lot of celebrities climbing this year. A couple of rockers, an actor, a football player. There are seven documentary and TV crews on this side of the mountain alone, and just as many, if not more, on the south side. So when we tried to get the media interested in our climb, there was no takers. Without publicity, we're circling the drain. Your skyscraper stunt was beamed all over the world. I knew about it before your mom called and asked if I could help out. Someone in our Chiang Mai office saw it and figured out the connection and called up here suggesting we try to put you on top. At first I told them no way, but then your mom called. I thought I could take care of your problem and mine at the same time. Did you talk to Mom about what we're doing? Yeah, before I left Kathmandu. What did you tell her? I told her I was going to take you on a climb, but I didn't tell her where. She's not going to like it when she finds out. Don't be so sure. She may not climb anymore, but she understands what it's all about. That's why she let you go to those climbing camps. She knows that I might risk my own life to summit, but I would never risk anyone else's, especially my own son's, to get to the top of a mountain. What's going to make her mad is you're not telling her beforehand, I said. You're probably right, but the reason I didn't tell her is that we can't let this out until you're back down. What about the film crew? They're not going to say anything. We're paying them. They work for us. What about Holly Anglo? He gave a deep, foggy sigh. It was cold in the tent. Blackmail, he said, or what amounts to it anyway. Somehow she figured it all out. I think she might have a line to Dr. Wu. And by the way, if you had flunked the physical, I wouldn't have brought you up here. Period. I would have sent you on to Chiang Mai, and I did enroll you in the international school there. Anyway, Holly called me here last week and said that she was going to print a story about your Everest attempt unless I gave her an exclusive. And now she wants to climb the mountain herself, I said. Yeah, it looks like I'm going to have to give her a shot. Otherwise, she's going to start filing reports as soon as she gets up here. Why do we have to keep it quiet? Because of the Chinese, he said. There's no age limit on this side of the mountain, but if they find out we're trying to put a 14-year-old on top, they might pull our climbing permit. They've been trying to get a teenager to summit for years. They wouldn't be too happy if an American teenager topped.
I would have sent you on to Chiang Mai, and I did enroll you in the international.
Sorry. Because of the Chinese, he said. There's no age limit on this side of the mountain, but if they find out we're trying to put a 14-year-old on top, they might pull our climbing permit. They've been trying to get a teenager to the summit for years. They wouldn't be too happy if an American teenager topped it before one of their own. And we're going to stop there for the day, and we will continue on Monday at 8 p.m. So I'm just going to close this in prayer really quick. Father God, thank you so much for each one of these wonderful people. Thank you that we could come together for this story. Lord, I just ask that you would put a hedge of protection around each one of these wonderful people, and that you would keep us safe. Lord, I just ask that your presence would be so real in our lives, Lord, that we would seek you and that we would find you and that we would hear your voice calling on our lives. God, I just ask for healing, I ask for wisdom, and I ask for peace over everyone that's under the sound of my voice, Lord. Thank you for each one of them. Go with them, be with them, and I just ask that you would pour out blessings over them. In Jesus' holy name, amen. You guys have a great rest of your night. I'm looking forward to seeing you real time live on Monday night.